Imagine, imagine for just a moment that you are completely enveloped in absolute, just impenetrable pitch blackness.
Total sensory deprivation.
Right, exactly. You can't even see your own hands in front of your face. And all around you, there's this deafening, highly physical roar of howling winds.
Like a freight train?
Yeah, a sound so loud it literally vibrates right through your chest cavity. It rattles your bones. The temperature is dropping so fast that every single breath feels like drawing tiny sharp blades of glass straight into your lungs.
It's a terrifying scenario.
It is. And in this space, stripped of every modern comfort, every piece of technology, and every guarantee of safety you've ever known, you are suddenly forced to confront the sheer, overwhelming, unfathomable scale of the natural world.
You're just a tiny speck.
A speck of fragile biology, standing right in the path of planetary forces that have been churning away for billions of years. And that chilling, visceral space, that razor-thin intersection between human fragility and the terrifying majesty of the wild, that is exactly where we are taking you today.
It's heavy subject matter, but so crucial to understanding who we are.
Absolutely. We are setting out today to completely deconstruct a highly specific, profoundly heavy piece of text. We're looking at the title and the categorization of a collection, The Unyielding Spirit, Epic Tales of Man versus Nature, specifically focusing in on its subsection, which is titled Epic Survival Stories, Man versus Nature.
And it's a text that really forces us to look at the absolute bedrock of the human condition. Today, we are going to philosophically, psychologically, and physiologically dissect this eternal struggle.
We're getting past the Hollywood versions, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
We are moving way past the romanticized cinematic versions of survival to explore the actual architecture of human resilience. What does it actually mean for you, physically and mentally, to face the insurmountable? We'll be looking at the hard mechanics of the will to live, how our biology reacts to an environment that is utterly indifferent to our existence, and the deep underlying psychological truths that dictate whether a person in that freezing, pitch-black scenario simply closes their eyes and gives up or fights for another breath.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to start right at the beginning with that very first phrase in the text. The unyielding spirit.
It's a powerful framing.
It really is because it frames everything that follows. It doesn't start with the harsh environment. It starts entirely with the internal human condition. But I want to push past just the basic dictionary definition of the word unyielding.
Right, because we usually think of it in terms of materials.
Exactly. In a physical engineering sense, we know it means refusing to bend or break under extreme pressure. But psychologically, when you're literally freezing to death on a mountain, what does that actually look like?
Well, it looks like a very specific neurological and psychological state. In the field of survival psychology, there's this stark, definitive dividing line between passive resignation and active coping.
Passive versus active.
Exactly. When we talk about something yielding under natural pressure, whether we're talking about crushing oceanic water pressure, freezing Arctic temperatures, or severe starvation, the human body has a very predictable mathematical failure rate. You've probably heard of the rule of threes in survival training.
Oh, yeah. Remind me, that's the one about exactly how long you can last without the bare biological necessities, right?
That is the one.
It's like 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 hours without shelter, in an extreme environment, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food.
Precisely. It's the ultimate baseline for our biological fragility. Our bodies are essentially these soft, vulnerable machines designed for a very, very narrow set of terrestrial conditions.
So the body absolutely yields.
Oh, it yields entirely. Frostbite destroys cellular tissue. Dehydration thickens your blood until the heart literally cannot pump it and fails. A severe caloric deficit leads to muscle catabolism, where your body literally eats its own heart muscle just to keep the brain alive. The biology yields every time.
So the unyielding part isn't physical at all.
Not at all. Unyielding in this context refers entirely to the cognitive resistance to that biological collapse. Active coping is when the brain refuses to accept the mathematical improbability of survival and continues to generate solutions.
Even when it's hopeless.
Even then, passive resignation, on the other hand, which psychologists often refer to as give-up-itis or psychogenic death, is when the mind yields before the body actually hits its physical limit. People literally just stop trying and die.
Wow. You know, I noticed they specifically use the word spirit in the title instead of mind or body. And at first I thought that was just a poetic choice, but why do you think that distinction matters so much in survival psychology? Because frankly, the mind yields too, doesn't it?
It does.
People in extreme situations hallucinate. Their cognitive functions completely broke down. They make terrible decisions.
The mind definitely fractures under extreme stress. When you are suddenly thrust into a life or death survival scenario, your HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, kicks into massive overdrive.
That's the fight or flight system.
Exactly. Your brain is instantly flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that handles logical, rational thought and complex problem solving, is essentially bypassed.
Just shut down.
Basically, yes, in favor of the amygdala, which is our primitive threat detection center. You lose the ability to do basic math. Your fine motor skills severely degrade. So you really can't rely on the unyielding mind because your rational mind is doing the calculations and screaming that you are going to die.
So spirit is the only word left.
Right. The word spirit is used here to encompass something much deeper and older than logic. It's the intrinsic, almost irrational drive to continue existing. It's that tiny spark that says, take one more step, when your muscles have zero glycogen left and your rational brain has already calculated that the rescue helicopter simply isn't coming.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine a massive, deeply rooted oak tree right in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane.
Okay, I like that.
The storm is that relentless external natural pressure we're talking about. The tree doesn't just stand there perfectly fine and ignore the wind.
No, it takes heavy damage.
Exactly. The wind violently strips away every single leaf. Small branches snap off and fly away.
Yeah.
The main trunk groans and bends to these terrifying, impossible angles. That tree taking damage, that is the human body and the rational mind yielding to the elements.
Right, the roots.
But the roots, the core, that unseen root system buried deep, deep down in the bedrock that refuses to snap. That root system is the unyielding spirit.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And the crucial part of that analogy is that the roots are invisible. Just as the sheer depth of a person's will to live is largely invisible to everyone, even to themselves, until the hurricane actually hits.
But I wanted to challenge that just a bit. Because is that root system really universal?
What do you mean?
Well, we like to tell ourselves this very comforting story that the unyielding spirit is hidden inside absolutely everyone. But we see historical accounts all the time where people in group survival situations just sit down in the snow, close their eyes, and give up while someone else right next to them keeps walking.
That's true.
So is this spirit actually a universal human trait, or is it basically a genetic lottery? Is it just a specific type of mental toughness that only a few rare people possess?
That is the million-dollar question in survival psychology. John Leach, who is a very prominent survival psychologist, suggests that in any given sudden catastrophe, only about 10 to 15% of people will remain calm and act rationally.
Only 10 to 15%. That's incredibly low.
It is. Another 10 to 15% will completely panic, scream, or just totally freeze up. And the vast majority, around 70 to 80% of people, will initially be entirely stunned and bewildered, essentially just waiting to be led by someone else.
Just paralyzed by the chaos.
Exactly. But the unyielding spirit isn't necessarily about never feeling fear or never being stunned in that initial moment. It's about the capacity to eventually transition out of that stunned, paralyzed state and move back into active coping.
Can you give an example of what that transition actually looks like in practice? Because it sounds almost superhuman.
Consider the deeply unsettling story of Aaron Ralston. He famously became trapped in Blue John Canyon in Utah when a massive boulder dislodged and completely crushed his right arm against the canyon wall.
Oh, that story is so hard to even think about.
It's grueling. And for the first few days, he was arguably just operating on standard survival protocol. He was rationing his tiny amount of water, he was trying to chip away at the rock with his knife, and he was waiting for a rescue that he logically knew was highly unlikely because he hadn't told anyone where he was going.
Right, he broke the cardinal rule of hiking.
He did, and during that time, he experienced severe despair, intense hallucinations, and he even recorded goodbye videos to his family. His body was definitely yielding. His rational mind was yielding to the mathematical reality of his impending death.
But then something shifted in him.
Right. After 127 hours of absolute agony, he reached a state that totally transcends basic mental toughness. He realized that the only physical way out of that canyon was to amputate his own arm using a dull, cheap multi-tool.
Just a horrific realization.
But to even do that, he first had to intentionally break his own radius and ulna bones using pure torque.
I can't even fathom the willpower required for that.
The rational human mind recoils at that level of self-inflicted pain. It completely defies all biological self-preservation instincts to violently destroy your own limb. But that intangible spirit, that absolute fundamental refusal to let his story end at the bottom of that canyon, it overrode his biology entirely.
That is the unyielding root system, snapping the branches to save the trunk.
Exactly. It's the perfect realization of that analogy.
That is incredibly intense, but it perfectly illustrates the point. Meanwhile, I consider it a rigorous test of my own unyielding spirit when the Wi-Fi goes down for 10 minutes and I have to actually read a physical book.
It really puts our modern, comfortable definition of struggle into sharp perspective.
It really does. Which actually transitions us perfectly from that deeply internal, hidden drive to the massive external scale of the events that actually force that spirit to reveal itself. The text immediately follows the unyielding spirit with the phrase, epic tales.
Let's talk about that scale.
Yeah, because we throw the word epic around a lot today. A new action movie is epic. Really good sandwich is epic.
The word has definitely lost its weight.
Exactly. But in its true, foundational, historical sense, epic implies a scale that goes far, far beyond the ordinary bounds of human experience. When we talk about an epic struggle in the context of man versus nature, we aren't talking about getting caught in a sudden rainstorm wearing the wrong footwear.
No. Epic implies a grueling, highly extended duration and vast, unforgiving landscapes. It implies monumentally stacked odds. An epic event fundamentally alters the historical timeline of the people involved. And what's fascinating here is the choice of the word tales.
Why not epic accounts or epic historical record?
Exactly. Why frame them as tales?
Well, because humanity is essentially a storytelling species. We've literally been described by anthropologists as Homo narrans, the storytelling ape. We don't just endure a terrifying avalanche and then mechanically record the barometric data points in a ledger.
We construct narratives.
We do.
We structure the trauma, the absolute fear, and the final triumph into a coherent story with a clear beginning, a messy middle, and a definitive end. The entire field of narrative psychology tells us that human beings use storytelling as a tool to make sense of chaotic, entirely unpredictable events.
Because the randomness is just too scary.
Right. In survival situations, the sheer randomness of nature is psychologically unbearable. Why did the boulder fall at that exact second? Why did the hurricane hit on that exact day? By turning that random chaos into a structured tale, we assign a deeper meaning to the suffering.
It gives it a purpose.
Furthermore, a tale inherently implies an audience. The act of survival isn't actually socially complete until the story is shared with the tribe. It's how we transfer the software of survival to the next generation.
Which really makes me wonder about you, the listeners. Why are we, sitting comfortably in our climate-controlled homes or listening safely on a morning commute, so incredibly drawn to these epic tales? Why do we actively seek out and consume stories of people enduring freezing cold, brutal starvation, and absolute misery?
Evolutionary psychologists would argue it's a vital form of safe simulation.
Safe simulation. I like that.
By consuming these epic tales, you, the listener, are allowed to simulate extreme danger without the actual risk. When you read or listen to a really intense survival story, your brain fires mirror neurons.
You're putting yourself in their shoes.
Constantly.
Yeah.
You're continuously asking yourself, what would I do in that cave? Could I really drink my own urine? Could I abandon my injured friend to save myself? You get to mentally rehearse for catastrophe and rigorously test your own psychological boundaries entirely from the comfort of your living room.
That makes total sense. It's almost like a modern scientific continuation of ancient myths.
How so?
Well, thousands of years ago, people used massive, terrifying myths to explain natural phenomena that they couldn't control or understand.
Yeah.
A catastrophic, village-destroying flood wasn't just a random weather event. It was divine retribution from angry gods.
A thunderstorm was a god swinging a hammer.
Exactly. They used those myths to give a human shape and a motive to the terrifying randomness of the physical world. Today, we know the actual atmospheric science behind the weather, but nature is still just as terrifying and just as random.
A hurricane doesn't care that you know about barometric pressure.
Exactly. So we use these modern epic survival tales in the exact same way. By turning a chaotic natural disaster into a structured tale of human perseverance, we give ourselves the comforting illusion that chaos can be navigated and beaten.
The narrative absolutely tames the chaos. But to truly understand these tales, we really have to look at one of the most famous historical examples of an epic duration and scale.
Okay, lay it on me.
If we want to understand what makes a survival story truly epic, We have to look at Sir Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic Expedition of 1914.
The endurance. That is basically the gold standard for man versus nature.
It absolutely is. Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, became solidly trapped in the shifting pack ice of the Weddell Sea. And they didn't just get stuck for a bad weekend. The ship was trapped in the ice for 10 agonizing months, slowly being crushed by the immense, unstoppable pressure of the freezing ocean before it finally splintered and sank.
Just a horrific thing to watch happen to your only way home.
And then Shackleton and his 27 men were stranded right on the drifting, freezing ice floes of Antarctica. They literally camped on the frozen ocean for another 5 months.
With winter setting in.
Yes. When the ice finally began to break up beneath their tents, they used 3 small, open lifeboats to reach the utterly desolate, uninhabited rock known as Elephant Island.
And even then, standing on solid ground, they weren't saved. They were completely and totally cut off from the entire world. No radios, no rescue beacons. No one even knew they were alive.
Precisely. So Shackleton and 5 of his strongest men took a 20-foot wooden lifeboat, the James Caird, and sailed 800 miles across the Drake Passage.
Which is arguably the most violent, churning stretch of ocean on the entire planet.
And they did it in the middle of the dark Antarctic winter, just to reach a remote whaling station on South Georgia Island. And after all that, after landing on the wrong side of the island because of hurricane-force winds, they had to climb over uncharted, highly dangerous glaciated mountains without any climbing gear to finally reach help.
Unbelievable.
It took nearly 2 full years from the time the ship was initially trapped to the time the rest of the men were finally rescued from Elephant Island. And the most epic part, not a single man from that original 28-person crew died.
When you lay the timeline out like that, the word epic almost feels incredibly insufficient. That is the ultimate defining demonstration of duration, landscape, and narrative. It wasn't just a single terrifying moment of panic. It was a grueling, multi-year marathon of active coping. Every single day required those men to wake up freezing on the ice and actively, consciously decide not to yield.
And that ties directly into the core central thesis of our text today. Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to highly highlight the deliberate repetition in the provided text.
The double use of man versus nature.
Exactly. The phrase man versus nature appears twice. It's the subtitle of the entire overarching collection, The Unyielding Spirit, Epic Tales of Man versus Nature, and then it immediately repeats in the subcategorization, Epic Survival Stories, Man versus Nature.
That repetition definitely isn't an accident.
It is hammering home the foundational conflict we are supposed to be analyzing.
It's the ultimate literary and literal conflict. But let's really do a philosophical breakdown of that duality, because there's a profound, almost tragic asymmetry there. We constantly use the word versus, which implies a boxing match, right?
2 equal opponents stepping into a ring with a mutual intent to defeat one another.
Exactly. But that is completely, fundamentally false when it comes to nature.
It is entirely false. Nature is not a villain. Nature has absolutely no malice, no hidden motive, no vendetta, and zero desire to see you fail. Nature is profoundly, absolutely indifferent.
It just exists.
Yes. The struggle being vividly described in Man versus Nature is actually the struggle between human biological fragility and the absolute apathy of the physical world.
It's like a brick wall and a speeding car. Nature doesn't fight you any more than a brick wall fights a car crashing into it at 90 miles an hour. The wall is just standing there, quietly obeying the basic laws of physics. The versus, the entire human concept of a fight or a struggle, is constructed entirely by the human mind.
The human desire to live is what creates the friction.
Right. If the human simply sat down on the snow and gave up, there would be no versus. There would just be the environment quietly absorbing biological matter.
Look at John Krakauer's terrifying account of the 1996 Mount Everest disaster in his book Into Thin Air.
Another absolute classic of the genre.
A massive rogue storm suddenly engulfed the upper mountain, trapping multiple commercial climbing teams in the death zone above 26,000 feet. 8 people died in a single night.
It was a total catastrophe.
But the mountain didn't specifically target them. The storm didn't have a malicious plan to ruin their summit attempt. The atmospheric jet streams simply dipped, the barometric pressure plummeted, and the ambient temperature dropped to 40 below zero.
Just weather patterns doing what weather patterns do.
Exactly. The cold doesn't freeze you because it hates you. It freezes you because thermodynamics dictate that heat transfers from warmer bodies to colder environments. Water doesn't drown you out of spite. It drowns you because your lungs are built for gaseous oxygen, and water is physically heavier than air. Gravity simply pulls mass toward the center of the Earth.
Understanding that deep asymmetry completely changes how you read these survival stories. But it also drastically changes how we view our own daily lives. Let me ask you, the listener, directly. How often do you perceive an entirely indifferent, inanimate obstacle in your own life as a malicious enemy?
We do it constantly.
Me too. How often do you feel like morning traffic is actively out to ruin your day, or that a sudden rainstorm is a highly personal attack on your weekend plans, or that a software glitch on your computer is secretly conspiring against your deadline?
We are so deeply evolutionarily wired for this man versus nature narrative. We are so primed by our ancient history to see ourselves as the embattled protagonists in an epic struggle that we constantly project intent onto pure apathy.
We take it personally.
We treat minor, everyday inconveniences as active adversaries in the boxing ring with us. Understanding the true, terrifying indifference of nature in these extreme survival texts can actually help you profoundly recalibrate how you interact with the everyday frictions of your life.
The universe isn't out to get you.
It just doesn't know you're there.
That's a sobering but weirdly comforting thought. The universe doesn't care enough to actually be out to get me. But when that entirely indifferent environment is pushed to the absolute extreme, when the temperature drops to -40 or the ship is being actively crushed by polar ice, that's when we enter the intense territory of the next part of our text, epic survival stories.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to deeply look at the anatomy of an epic survival story. What actually defines this highly specific genre of narrative? What separates a survival story from a simple, depressing tragedy?
Well, on a very basic level, it's just the outcome, right? Someone actually lives to tell the tale. If everyone dies, it's just a tragedy. If someone makes it out, it's a survival story.
That's true, but structurally, narratively, it's much, much more than just the outcome. The true anatomy of these stories is defined by the granular, agonizing, moment-by-moment process of problem solving under extreme duress.
The mechanics of staying alive.
Exactly. There is a massive duality to the word survival. On one hand, survival is the most primitive, base, reptilian biological imperative that we have. It is the exact same chemical instinct that makes a single-celled amoeba swim away from a toxin.
Just pure reaction.
But on the other hand, when human survival is pushed to the absolute extreme in these epic scenarios, it somehow becomes the highest, most brilliant expression of human intellect and ingenuity.
It perfectly bridges the gap between our most animalistic base instincts and our absolute highest cognitive functions. It forces desperate people to invent, to calculate, and to engineer complex solutions with whatever pathetic scraps of material they happen to have left.
A totally perfect example of this duality is the Apollo 13 lunar mission.
Oh man, versus the vacuum of space.
Exactly. While we often think of nature as dense forests or freezing oceans, the vacuum of deep space is the ultimate, most hostile, indifferent natural environment imaginable. When the oxygen tank exploded en route to the moon, the astronauts and mission control back in Houston were instantly thrust into a pure, unadulterated survival scenario.
The clock was ticking immediately.
The biological imperative, the desperate need for breathable oxygen, drinkable water, and basic thermal regulation was driving every single decision. But the actual solution required the absolute pinnacle of human engineering and physics.
They basically had to MacGyver a life support system.
They did. They had to mathematically adapt the square carbon dioxide scrubbers from the Dying Command module to fit the round holes in the lunar module. And they had to do it using only plastic bags, cardboard manual covers, and duct tape.
While freezing and breathing high levels of CO2.
That exact synthesis of primal animal desperation and high-level astrophysics is the ultimate crucible of a true survival story.
I really love the word crucible there. Think of the structure of a survival story like a massive industrial pressure cooker.
I can see that.
You have the environment, the freezing cold of Everest, the literal vacuum of space, or the terrifying isolation of the Andes Mountains acting as the roaring fire underneath the pot. It applies continuous, escalating thermal or atmospheric energy. Then you have the isolation factor. Being completely, utterly cut off from all outside help acts as the heavy steel lid of the pressure cooker, locking tightly into place. There is zero release valve.
And the fragile human beings trapped inside that pressure cooker are forced into a strict binary outcome. Under that kind of intense mathematical and psychological pressure, they will either structurally fail and be totally destroyed, or they will undergo a profound internal transformation and forge a completely new way to exist.
Which brings us to the famous 1972 Andes flight disaster, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571.
One of the most famous survival stories of the 20th century.
This is perhaps one of the most intense pressure cookers in modern recorded history. A plane carrying a young rugby team crashes at 11,800 feet deep in the remote freezing Andes Mountains.
The initial violent crash killed a quarter of the passengers instantly. Several more died from the bitter cold and severe injuries in the terrifying days that followed.
And they had nothing.
Nothing. They were stranded in the freezing snow without any winter clothing, completely devoid of medical supplies, and with almost zero food. And then, the ultimate psychological blow. They heard on a tiny, scavenged transistor radio that the search for them had been officially called off.
The lid of the pressure cooker was completely sealed.
Locked tight.
And what makes this an epic survival story isn't just that they passively endured the cold, but how they actively endured it. When they completely ran out of the meager rations they found scattered on the plane, they were faced with a biologically impossible choice.
The ultimate taboo.
To avoid starving to death, they made the collective, deeply agonizing decision to consume the bodies of their dead friends and teammates.
That traumatic decision represents the absolute ultimate intersection of the unyielding spirit, base biological necessity, and cognitive rationalization. It was a profound, irreversible internal transformation. They had to completely dismantle their deeply held societal taboos and strict religious norms just to survive the environment.
But the story didn't even end there.
No, it didn't. After 2 grueling months living on the glacier, fully realizing that absolutely no one was coming to save them, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa decided they had to hike out.
Without any gear.
Without any mountaineering gear, severely malnourished, and literally wearing makeshift clothes scavenged from the dead, they climbed a 15,000-foot frozen peak and hiked for 10 brutal days until they finally miraculously found civilization.
That is the ultimate example of active coping. When the rescue doesn't come, you physically become the rescue.
You refuse to yield.
Exactly. But let's take a step back and look at how a massive story, like the Andes flight disaster, is actually presented to us in the specific context of the text we're analyzing today. There's a very deliberate, specific editorial word right in the provided prompt: excerpts.
Right. The text is framed as excerpts.
We are explicitly told we are looking at excerpts from the Unyielding Spirit.
So what does this all mean? What does it actually mean that we are specifically looking at excerpts rather than the whole book? It completely changes the way a reader interacts with the text.
We miss the context.
We aren't getting the slow, boring buildup. We aren't getting the mundane weeks of logistical preparation, the boring details of buying supplies, or the long, tedious physical therapy sessions years after the rescue.
An excerpt represents a highly concentrated distillation of the event. In the context of an epic survival story, an excerpt is almost certainly the climax. Whoever edited this collection deliberately cut away the prologue and the epilogue. They zoomed in with a magnifying glass to focus the sun's hot rays on the absolute peak of the tension.
The excerpt is the exact chronological moment where the unyielding spirit violently collides with the harshest element of nature.
It's the point of maximum friction.
Exactly. It is the exact agonizing moment Aaron Ralston breaks his own arm. It is the terrifying night the Endurance finally crunches and splinters under the Antarctic ice. It is the devastating moment Nando Parado reaches the summit of the Andes Peak, expecting to see green valleys, and realizes there are just more snow-capped mountains as far as the eye can see.
By extracting only the pure, undiluted adrenaline and struggle, the text strips away the mundane reality of waiting. It forces you, the reader, to exist purely in the raw, terrifying friction between life and death.
You don't get the relief.
Right. You don't get the emotional relief of the eventual rescue. You only get the visceral agony of the endurance. It creates this hyper-focused lens on the exact mechanics of human willpower. Within the tight boundaries of an excerpt, the struggle feels entirely infinite.
It creates a deeply immersive, totally unrelenting experience for the reader. It's a very modern, fast-paced way of consuming these ancient tales. We just want the peak intensity without the boring waiting. But it's so important to remember that for the survivors themselves, the waiting, the agonizing, freezing boredom, punctuated by brief moments of sheer terror, was actually the hardest part of the ordeal.
This has been an incredibly deep and expansive philosophical journey today.
It really has.
We started with just a handful of very specific words: the unyielding spirit, epic tales of man versus nature, and epic survival stories, and we've completely unpacked a universe of meaning from them. We've seen exactly how the unyielding spirit isn't just a macho idea of toughness. It's the specific neurological and psychological shift from passive resignation to active coping.
Refusing the mathematics of death.
Yes, and we've explored how epic tales serve as our collective evolutionary memory, allowing us to safely simulate extreme danger and process the terrifying randomness of the universe through the structure of narrative.
We completely reframe the verses in Man versus Nature, deeply realizing that nature is just a beautifully indifferent system, and our desperate struggle against it is a testament to our profound, sometimes completely irrational desire to just keep existing.
A brick wall in the car.
Exactly. We looked at how extreme survival is an unforgiving pressure cooker that forces human ingenuity and base biology to merge, whether that's MacGyvering an oxygen scrubber in the vacuum of space or making unthinkable taboo choices on a freezing Andean glacier.
And finally, we saw how deliberately distilling these massive experiences into pure, intense excerpts of life or death friction serves as a profound mirror reflecting our own internal resilience. It truly is a mirror. But peering deeply into that mirror today, this raises an important question, one that I really want you to take with you and mull over long after you finish listening to this conversation.
It's the ultimate takeaway.
For millennia, the vast majority of our epic tales have been about literally physically surviving the brutal elements of nature. It was our primary, everyday evolutionary hurdle. But today, as our technology advances at lightning speed, as we build much stronger walls, better climate control, and massive digital networks that insulate us entirely in modern synthetic comforts, our daily physical friction with raw nature is rapidly vanishing.
We're totally insulated.
So is the unyielding spirit something we're slowly losing through a sheer lack of use? Are we becoming structurally, psychologically weaker because we no longer have to push back against the hurricane on a daily basis? Or is that primal, unyielding spirit still resting perfectly intact, deeply rooted and dormant inside you, just waiting quietly in the dark for the next great storm to finally arrive?
It's a profound question of whether comfort ultimately breeds fragility, or if our biology simply efficiently keeps that spirit in reserve until the pressure cooker lid violently snaps shut.
Thank you so much for exploring this heavy, fascinating landscape with us today. Hopefully this leaves you looking at your own daily struggles and your own hidden, deep-rooted resilience in a completely different light.